For having his bond increased to $2 million, a 25-year-old Houston area father could be facing capital murder charges. This depends on the autopsy of his 2-year-old daughter, Zevaya, whom he is accused of choking and killing during a SWAT situation on Monday. KPRC2's Rowan Logan joins us live near the county jail where this man remains. Rowan.
Keith, the prosecutor tells me if a medical examiner's office determines that the 2-year-old little girl died due to strangulation, they then will raise the suspect's charge to capital murder. Deontray Flanagan wears a yellow jumpsuit with his hands behind his back in handcuffs as he appears for the first time in front of a judge. The 25-year-old charged with murder. Investigators say he picked up his 2-year-old daughter from daycare, went to the mom's job at Walmart, threatened her, then led law enforcement on a 30-mile chase with his daughter in the passenger seats without a seatbelt or car seats. Prosecutors say he video called the child's grandmother. In that FaceTime, they were watching the defendant strangle and assault the 2-year-old as he demanded Ms. Watson's phone password. Chow Wen is a trauma therapist with the GEM Wellness and Counseling Service.
What an unthinkable tragedy that a child, a 2-year-old toddler, had to be weaponized as a result of domestic violence.
The sheriff's office looking into its overall response surrounding this case, including the chase and the events leading up to it, including when deputies responded to the family home last week.
This happened in a 5-day span, starting Wednesday night.
The criminal justice system, law enforcement, prosecutors, they are there to protect survivors. Protective orders are meant to protect you, not to hurt you. In this case, it appears the system has failed this woman.
The 2-year-old's grandfather tells me they wish, the family that is, wishes the suspect didn't receive a bond. If you'd like to help the family with funeral arrangements, they've created a GoFundMe, and you can find that link on our website at clicktohouston.com. Reporting live downtown Houston, Rowan Logan, KPRC 2 News.
She was on his lap and she was gasping for air, and as she was gasping for air, he just had his arm around her neck, just squeezing tighter. He was like, "This is what you made me do. All you care about is that man." And I'm telling him, "No, stop, please. This is your daughter. She loves you." But he's still doing it.
Support us by subscribing to this channel. Hit the notification bell icon so you won't miss our latest videos.
A young life stolen, a community in shock, and a tragedy that defies comprehension. This is the story of Zevaya Flanagan, a 2-year-old girl from Houston, Texas, whose life was cut short in a horrifying sequence of events that no one could have predicted. On March 20, 2023, a police chase gripped Texas, but what unfolded during those 45 minutes went far beyond what anyone could have imagined. A father live-streaming his actions, a mother helplessly watching in horror, and a system that had been warned but failed to intervene. This is not just a story of a senseless crime. It's the story of how warning signs were ignored, how lives were shattered, and how an innocent child became the victim of a violent act at the hands of someone she should have been able to trust. Who was Deontray Flanagan? What pushed him to commit such an unthinkable act? And how did the authorities fail to prevent a tragedy that so many saw coming? This is a story that demands attention, a story of heartbreak, injustice, and lessons that can never be forgotten. Zevaya Flanagan's life may have been short, but her memory lives on, as a reminder of the urgent need to act when lives are at risk. Stay with us as we uncover the shocking details behind the tragic death of this beautiful, vibrant little girl and explore the questions that remain unanswered. Deontray Flanagan and Kirsten Watson once shared what seemed to be the beginnings of a happy family. Their daughter, Zevaya, was the center of their world, a bright and loving child with a contagious laugh that could melt hearts. But beneath the surface, the relationship between Deontray and their breakup was far from amicable. Arguments over trust and accusations of infidelity drove a wedge between them. For Kirsten, the separation was a necessary step to protect herself and her child from Deontray's increasingly volatile behavior. For Deontray, it was a blow he refused to accept. In the months following their split, Kirsten began to see signs that Deontray's anger was spiraling out of control. He bombarded her with threatening messages and showed up unannounced, demanding answers she had already given. Her concerns grew with each passing day, but when she reached out to authorities for help, her fears were dismissed. Deontray's criminal history added another layer to Kirsten's unease. He had a record that included violent outbursts and property destruction, patterns that hinted at a dangerous temperament. Yet, despite her repeated pleas, the system did not intervene. Kirsten later said, "I told them over and over that something was going to happen, but no one listened." Her words, spoken in grief, now echo as a haunting warning of the events that were about to unfold. March 20, 2023 began like any other day for Kirsten Watson. She went to work, focused on her responsibilities, and tried to maintain a sense of normalcy. But by midday, her world would be turned upside down. Deontray arrived at her workplace unannounced, carrying an air of determination and anger. He had picked up their 2-year-old daughter Zevaya from daycare without permission, a clear violation of their agreement. Kirsten's co-workers recall the chilling moment he walked in, demanding to see her. Witnesses described Deontray as agitated and aggressive. He confronted Kirsten in front of her colleagues, accusing her of seeing another man. His words were laced with anger, but it was his actions that escalated the situation into something far more terrifying. Deontray demanded Kirsten's phone and insisted she hand over her passcodes. When she hesitated, he struck her multiple times in front of stunned onlookers. Kirsten, desperate to protect herself and her daughter, begged him to stop. As the tension reached its peak, Deontray snatched Zevaya and stormed out of the building. Kirsten's co-workers immediately called the police, but by the time help arrived, Deontray and Zevaya were already gone. Kirsten was left standing in the aftermath, her face bruised and her heart racing. She knew that her daughter's life was now in danger and she had no way of stopping what might come next. What followed was a scene of chaos that played out across Houston's roads. Deontray, with Zevaya unrestrained in the passenger seat, led police on a high-speed chase that spanned 30 miles. Witnesses described his reckless driving, weaving between cars and running red lights as if the world around him didn't exist. During this chase, Deontray used Facetime to call Kirsten. What she saw on her screen was every mother's worst nightmare. Through her tears, she begged him to stop, but her pleas fell on deaf ears. Kirsten's father, Curtis Watson, was also on the call. "We tried to reason with him," he later said, his voice trembling with emotion. But instead of relenting, Deontray began to harm Zevaya, right there on the video call. The chase came to a violent end near St. Dunstan's Episcopal Church when Deontray crashed his vehicle into others on the road. By this point, SWAT teams had surrounded the scene and the air was thick with tension. Deontray refused to surrender immediately, initiating a standoff that left officers on edge. When he was finally taken into custody, the sight inside the car was devastating. Zevaya, unresponsive and gravely injured, was rushed to Memorial Hermann Hospital by helicopter. Despite the efforts of medical professionals, the injuries she suffered were too severe. 2-year-old Zevaya Flanagan was pronounced dead shortly after her arrival. What began as an ordinary day for a mother at work had ended in an unimaginable tragedy. For Kirsten Watson, the heartbreak was immediate, but the questions about what could have been done to save her daughter would linger for a lifetime. The 45 minutes that followed Deontray Flanagan's escape with Zevaya would be some of the most harrowing and chaotic moments for everyone involved. Police quickly initiated a pursuit, tracking Flanagan as he sped through Houston's streets. Witnesses along the route reported seeing his red SUV swerving dangerously between lanes, running red lights and narrowly avoiding collisions. Officers on the scene described his driving as reckless, showing no regard for the safety of his young daughter, unrestrained in the front seat beside him. Throughout the pursuit, police worked to bring the situation under control. Tactical units were deployed and roadblocks were considered, but Flanagan seemed determined to evade capture at all costs. His driving became more erratic as the chase continued, with speeds reaching dangerous levels and the risk to bystanders increasing by the second. Meanwhile, Kirsten Watson and her father Curtis Watson were watching the events unfold in real time. Kirsten had joined a FaceTime call initiated by Flanagan. Her worst fears began to materialize as she saw her ex-partner growing more agitated, with Zevaya sitting helplessly beside him. Kirsten, her voice trembling, pleaded with Flanagan to stop the car and let Zevaya go. "Please don't hurt her," she begged. "She's just a baby." But Flanagan ignored her cries, his grip on the situation slipping further into chaos. The chase carried on for miles, with officers staying close behind, desperate to end the ordeal before it escalated any further. For the Watson family, the minutes felt like hours, their hearts pounding with fear for little Zevaya's safety. As the chase continued, the FaceTime call turned into a live broadcast of horror. Kirsten and Curtis Watson could only watch as Deontray's behavior grew increasingly violent. On the other side of the screen, Deontray began to physically assault Zevaya. Kirsten's voice, breaking under the weight of her anguish, filled the call. Stop it, please," she screamed, her cries echoing through the video feed. Curtis, struggling to maintain composure, tried to reason with Flanagan. "You don't have to do this," he urged. "Think about your daughter." but reasoning seemed impossible in the face of Flanagan's escalating rage. Prosecutors would later reveal chilling screenshots from the Facetime call, showing Zevaya's injuries as they unfolded. The helplessness Kirsten and Curtis felt in those moments was unimaginable. Every second stretched into an eternity as they watched, powerless to intervene. Kirsten would later describe the experience as a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. "I begged him," she said through tears. "I told him I'd do anything he wanted, just let her go, but he wouldn't stop." This wasn't just a chase anymore. It was a horrifying spectacle of violence, played out in real time for a mother and grandfather who could do nothing but bear witness. The chase finally came to an end near St. Dunstan's Episcopal Church, where Flanagan's SUV collided with multiple vehicles, bringing his reckless flight to a halt. The scene was chaotic as police vehicles surrounded the car and officers moved in to contain the situation. For a tense few moments, Flanagan refused to exit the vehicle. A SWAT team was called in, their weapons drawn as they prepared for the worst. Negotiators worked to bring the standoff to a peaceful conclusion, but the air was heavy with uncertainty. Eventually, Flanagan was subdued and taken into custody, but as officers approached the vehicle, the full extent of the tragedy became clear. Inside the SUV, they found Zevaya, unresponsive and gravely injured. Emergency responders rushed to airlift her to Memorial Hermann Hospital, but the damage had already been done. The medical team worked tirelessly to save her, but their efforts were in vain. Zevaya Flanagan, just 2 years old, was pronounced dead shortly after her arrest. For Kirsten Watson, the news was shattering. The hopes she had clung to during the chase were extinguished in an instant. Her daughter, the light of her life, was gone. The events of that day left a community in mourning and a family shattered, but they also raised questions about how this tragedy could have been prevented and about the system that failed to act before it was too late. When officers removed Zevaya from the vehicle, her small, fragile body showed the devastating effects of the violence she had endured. The airlift to Memorial Hermann Hospital was an act of desperation, with medical personnel on board working tirelessly to stabilize her. At the hospital, a team of doctors and nurses fought against the odds, doing everything in their power to save the 2-year-old girl. For a brief moment, there was a glimmer of hope as they tried to revive her, but the injuries inflicted by Deontray Flanagan were too severe. Blunt force trauma and neck compression had caused irreparable damage. Zevaya's tiny body could no longer sustain the fight for life. She was pronounced dead shortly after her arrival. The hospital room, once filled with frantic activity, fell silent. The weight of the loss was overwhelming for everyone present. Kirsten Watson, informed of her daughter's death, collapsed into tears, her worst fears now a devastating reality. The following day, the medical examiner released their findings, confirming the cause of death as a combination of blunt force injuries and asphyxiation. The report painted a grim picture of the violence Zevaya endured in her final moments, leaving no doubt about the brutality of the crime. For Kirsten, the pain was unbearable. "She was my everything," she later said, her voice breaking with emotion. "I don't understand how someone could do this to their own child." The loss of Zevaya left an unimaginable void, not just for her family but for everyone who had followed her story. The news sent shockwaves through the Houston community and beyond, leaving people grappling with the senselessness of her death. In the days following the tragedy, questions began to emerge not just about Deontray Flanagan's actions, but about the system that had failed to intervene. Kirsten Watson revealed that she had repeatedly reached out to law enforcement, warning them about Deontray's escalating threats. "Lou sent me messages saying he would hurt me and take our daughter," she explained. "I went to the police, but they didn't do anything. They said there wasn't enough evidence." Kirsten wasn't the only one who saw the warning signs. Friends and family had also expressed concerns about Flanagan's erratic behavior and history of violence. His criminal record, which included assault and property damage, should have raised red flags. Yet, despite multiple reports, no action was taken to protect Kirsten or Zevaya. Advocacy groups have since pointed to this case as an example of systemic failure. Experts in domestic violence prevention argue that Kirsten's warnings should have been taken more seriously. "When someone says they're in danger, we have to believe them," one advocate said. Too often, these cases end in tragedy because the system doesn't act in time. The lack of intervention has sparked a broader conversation about the gaps in the justice system. Why weren't Flanagan's threats enough to warrant immediate action? What protocols need to be in place to protect children in situations like this? For Kirsten, the questions feel like a cruel reminder of what could have been prevented. "I told them something was going to happen," she said tearfully. "They thought I was overreacting, but now my baby is gone." The aftermath of Zevaya's death has left a legacy of grief and anger. It is a stark reminder that warnings cannot be ignored, and that lives depend on swift, decisive action. Advocacy groups continue to push for reform, vowing to ensure that no other family has to endure what the Watsons have faced. The trial of Deontray Flanagan began in January 2025, nearly 2 years after the tragic events that claimed the life of Zevaya Flanagan. For Kirsten and Curtis Watson, walking into the courtroom was like reopening a wound that had never truly healed. The weight of their loss was palpable, but they were determined to seek justice for their beloved Zevaya. Kirsten's testimony was a raw and heart-wrenching account of the events leading up to the tragedy. Through tears, she recounted the fear and helplessness she felt during the 45-minute chase, watching on Facetime as her daughter suffered. Her voice broke as she described pleading with Deontray to stop. "I begged him," she said. "I told him I'd do anything he wanted. He just wouldn't listen." Curtis Watson took the stand next, his voice steady but filled with emotion. He described his attempts to reason with Flanagan during the chase and the devastating moment he realized his granddaughter might already be gone. "He showed me her lifeless body," Curtis said, his eyes welling with tears. "That image will haunt me for the rest of my life." The prosecution presented powerful evidence to the jury, including screenshots from the FaceTime call and video footage from the police chase. Jurors watched in silence as Kirsten's anguished screams echoed through the courtroom. The images of Zevaya's injuries and the chaotic pursuit painted a chilling picture of the violence she endured. Witnesses were called to provide further context, including Kirsten's co-workers who had seen the initial confrontation and police officers who described the chaotic moments leading up to Flanagan's arrest. Each testimony added another layer of devastation, reinforcing the brutality of the crime. Throughout the trial, Deontray Flanagan's demeanor was erratic and unsettling. At times, he appeared disinterested, staring blankly as evidence was presented. At other moments, he erupted in anger, lashing out verbally and causing disruptions that required intervention from court deputies. One particularly jarring incident occurred during a break in proceedings when Flanagan lunged at a photojournalist's camera, prompting officers to physically restrain him. The outburst left those in the courtroom shaken and underscored the volatile nature of the man on trial. Despite his attempts to shift the focus away from his actions, the evidence against Flanagan was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for only a few hours before returning with a unanimous verdict, guilty of capital murder. Flanagan showed no visible reaction as the verdict was read, but the relief in the courtroom was palpable. For Kirsten and Curtis Watson, it was a bittersweet moment. While justice had been served, it could never bring back the bright, joyful little girl they had lost. The judge sentenced Deontray Flanagan to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The decision ensured he would spend the rest of his life behind bars, unable to harm anyone else. As Kirsten left the courtroom, she carried with her a mix of emotions: relief that justice had been done, but an ache in her heart that would never fade. "This isn't the ending we wanted," she said later, "but it's the best we could hope for. Zevaya deserved so much more." The grief left in the wake of Zevaya Flanagan's death is a pain that words struggle to capture. For Kirsten Watson, the loss of her daughter is a wound that time will never heal. "She was my everything," Kirsten said, her voice heavy with emotion. "She had the brightest smile and the kindest heart. She loved to sing, to play, to laugh. Every day with her was a blessing." Curtis Watson, Zevaya's grandfather, described the joy she brought into their lives. She could light up any room she walked into. She loved animals, loved dancing, and had a curiosity about the world that was so special for someone so young. She was just 2 years old, but she taught us all about love and happiness in ways we'll never forget. The Watson family held a memorial service for Zevaya, inviting friends, neighbors, and members of the community to celebrate her life. A small table was adorned with her favorite toys, a framed photo of her infectious smile at the center. "We don't want her to be remembered for what happened to her," Kirsten said. "We want her to be remembered for the joy she brought into this world." The service ended with letters written by family members read aloud through tears. One letter from Kirsten read, "Zevaya, you were my world. You were taken from me far too soon, but I promise to carry your memory in my heart every single day. I love you, my baby, forever and always." Zevaya's death has sparked outrage, not just within her community, but across the nation. Advocacy groups have rallied around her story, calling for systemic reforms to prevent similar tragedies. Domestic violence prevention organizations have highlighted the failures that led to this devastating outcome. "This was preventable," one advocate said. "When someone like Kirsten comes forward with credible threats and concerns, the system needs to act immediately. We can't afford to let warnings slip through the cracks." The case has also reignited conversations about improving child protection protocols. Experts argue that more robust systems are needed to identify and respond to threats, particularly in cases involving custody disputes and histories of abuse. Community members have come together to honor Zevaya's memory through vigils and awareness campaigns. In Houston, a candlelight vigil was held near the site of the crash, with dozens gathering to pay their respects. Attendees held candles and released white balloons into the sky, each one representing a child lost to violence. Kirsten has since joined forces with advocacy groups to push for change. She has become a vocal advocate for domestic violence awareness, sharing her story to help others recognize the signs of danger and seek help before it's too late. I want people to know what happened to Zevaya, not to dwell on the pain, but to understand how important it is to act when someone is in danger, Kirsten said. Her life mattered, her story matters, and if sharing it can save even one life, then her memory will live on in the most meaningful way. The tragedy of Zevaya Flanagan's death has left an indelible mark on her family and community. While the loss is immeasurable, her story has sparked a movement, a call for action to ensure that no child, no family has to endure such a heartbreaking. The story of Zevaya Flanagan is one that will not be forgotten. Her bright smile, her joyful laughter, and the love she brought to those around her remain etched in the hearts of her family and everyone who has learned about her life. This tragedy has left a void that can never be filled, but it also serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of action, awareness, and accountability. We must do better at listening, better at intervening, and better at protecting those who cannot protect themselves. Zevaya's life was cut short by violence that could have been prevented, but her story doesn't have to end here. Her memory can inspire change. It can compel us to take a stand against domestic violence, to advocate for stronger protections for children, and to demand that our systems respond swiftly and decisively. To honor Zevaya, let us commit to being the voices that speak up for the voiceless and the hands that act when lives are at risk. Every action, no matter how small, can make a difference. If you or someone you know is in danger, reach out. Resources are available and help is just a phone call away. Together, we can build a world where stories like Zevaya's no longer exist. Thank you for watching this video and taking the time to learn about Zevaya's story. Please consider supporting initiatives that aim to prevent domestic violence and protect children at risk. Share this video, spark conversations, and help spread awareness. In memory of Zevaya Flanagan, may her life, though tragically short, inspire a brighter, safer future for others.